John Carter had never imagined this would be his fate. A modest diplomat from Earth, his job had mainly involved low-stakes trade negotiations and simple cultural exchanges with species new to humanity. But now, as he stood aboard the towering Ziarkora royal vessel, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow been pulled into a far greater game than he was prepared for. The Ziarkora were among the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They hailed from a planet of colossal mountains, deep seas, and uncharted wildernesses, where evolution had granted them resilience, intellect, and an almost regal disposition. Their society was built on strict hierarchies and an unyielding loyalty to their monarch. Queen Ileana had ruled the Ziarkora Empire for centuries, her silver exoskeleton gleaming with a grace that made her the epitome of authority in the galaxy. As John's transport sped toward the Ziarkora capital, he tried to focus on the mission at hand, though little had been shared with him. The Galactic Human Consortium, Earth's governing body, had received an urgent message from the Queen herself. A single sentence: send the human John Carter to the Ziarkora capital immediately. No explanation, no further details. For days, John had been trapped in a whirlwind of confusion. Why him? What could a figure as grand as the Ziarkora Queen want with a mere human diplomat? As the transport ship cut through space at faster-than-light speeds, his mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding? Maybe some mix-up in bureaucracy had mistakenly sent him, and they truly meant to summon someone of greater political importance. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. His thoughts were interrupted as the ship entered the atmosphere of Ziarkora Prime, the capital world. John marveled at the towering spires of glass and metal that reached up toward the sky, the floating cities that drifted lazily above the clouds, and the colossal starports that dotted the planet's surface like gleaming jewels. The architecture was grand, almost beyond comprehension, as if the very planet itself had been molded into a testament to the Empire's power. The ship descended toward the royal palace, an enormous structure that gleamed with an unnatural brightness. He stepped out of the ship onto a platform surrounded by tall, silent guards, their insectoid eyes tracking his every movement. Though they said nothing, John could feel their scrutiny as he made his way down a path flanked by grandiose statues of past Ziarkora rulers. The palace doors, enormous and ornately designed, opened soundlessly as he approached. A wave of cool, fresh air greeted him, along with the scent of some alien flowers whose colors and forms were beyond human understanding. Inside, the palace was even more breathtaking. The ceilings stretched higher than any cathedral on Earth, and the walls were adorned with intricate carvings that told the story of the Ziarkora Empire's rise to power. John barely had time to admire the artwork before he was met by an imposing figure, Queen Ileana herself. She was even more formidable in person than any holographic image had conveyed. Her exoskeleton glistened with an otherworldly sheen, and her tall, slender frame moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic. Her eyes, dark and intense, bore into John as though they could see directly into his soul. He bowed deeply, unsure of what else to do. Every instinct screamed at him that he was out of his depth. The Queen remained silent for a moment, studying him with a cold gaze before she finally spoke. "You are John Carter, the human diplomat Earth has sent?" she asked, her voice calm yet carrying the weight of centuries of authority. "Yes, Your Majesty," John replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "It is an honor to be here." The Queen didn't acknowledge his pleasantries. "You may be wondering why you were summoned here," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "There is a task that only you, a human, can fulfill." John's mind raced. What could possibly be so urgent, and why him? "You are to live with my daughter, Princess Araleth," Queen Ileana said without preamble. The words hung in the air, sinking into John's mind with all the subtlety of a hammer blow. "It is my command." John blinked, certain he had misheard. Live with her daughter? This was beyond bizarre. I don't understand, Your Majesty. What exactly does this involve?" The Queen's expression hardened. "My daughter has reached an age where she must learn the ways of different species, their cultures, and their strengths. She is heir to the throne, and her future will be intertwined with that of the galaxy. But more than that, you will protect her, in ways that even our finest warriors cannot." John's confusion deepened. Protect her? He was no soldier, no bodyguard. And why would the Queen of the Ziarkora Empire believe a human could protect the princess better than the Empire's elite? Before he could voice his concerns, the queen stepped closer, her towering form casting a shadow over him. "There are threats to my daughter's life that even you cannot comprehend, John Carter. This is not a request. You will live with her, protect her, and teach her what it means to be human. Should you fail, the consequences will be severe." John swallowed hard, realizing that refusing was not an option. His mind was still reeling, trying to process what had just been demanded of him. The Ziarkora Empire's crown princess in his care? It sounded absurd. Yet the queen's eyes burned with an intensity that left no room for argument. Whatever her reasons, she believed this was necessary. Queen Ileana's gaze softened, just a fraction. "You will be escorted to the princess's quarters. Remember, John Carter, my daughter's life is now your responsibility." As the queen turned away, dismissing him with a flick of her hand, John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had been pulled into something far greater than he had ever anticipated, and there was no turning back. The massive palace doors opened once more, and two Ziarkora guards approached to escort him deeper into the royal compound. As they led him down the long, winding corridors of the palace, John couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. What was it about Princess Araleth that required such drastic measures? And why did the queen think only a human could protect her? The question swirled in his mind as the palace corridors seemed to stretch on forever, each turn revealing more of the Ziarkora Empire's vast history and wealth. Soon, they arrived at a set of massive, ornate doors, far more elaborate than any others he had passed. The guards stopped, giving John a silent nod before opening the doors to reveal a grand chamber unlike anything he had ever seen before. Towering windows let in the soft light of Ziarkora Prime's twin suns, casting intricate shadows across the room. And standing in the center, bathed in the soft glow of the light, was Princess Araleth. John's breath caught in his throat. She was unlike any Ziarkora he had ever seen. Chapter 2. The Enigmatic Princess. John stood frozen at the entrance to the grand chamber, his breath catching in his throat. Princess Araleth was nothing like he had imagined. While the Ziarkora race was known for their insectoid features, tall and intimidating forms, Princess Araleth had a softness to her that was almost human. Her silver exoskeleton shimmered with an iridescent hue under the soft twin suns, and her eyes, large and almond-shaped, were a deep shade of violet that seemed to swirl with emotion. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal. Her long, flowing robes, made of some silky, otherworldly material, hugged her slender form, and her regal posture made it clear she was every bit the future ruler of the Ziarkora Empire. But there was something else in her gaze, something that unsettled John, a quiet sadness, or perhaps a sense of longing that belied her status. The two Ziarkora guards behind John gave him a slight nudge, breaking him out of his reverie. He swallowed and stepped forward cautiously, unsure of what to say. His mind still struggled to piece together the gravity of his situation. Here he was, a simple human diplomat, standing before the heir to one of the galaxy's most powerful empires, tasked with living alongside her and ensuring her safety. And for reasons he couldn't begin to fathom, only he, a human, had been given this responsibility. As he approached, Princess Araleth's violet eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. John could feel the weight of her gaze, as though she were sizing him up, judging him silently. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and melodic, a stark contrast to the authoritative tone of her mother. "You are the human my mother has chosen to live with me," she said, her words carrying a slight tremor. It wasn't a question. She already knew who he was, just as much as John knew who she was. But there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with this arrangement either. "Yes, Your Highness," John replied, bowing slightly, though he wasn't entirely sure what the proper etiquette was when meeting alien royalty. "John Carter, at your service." Araleth's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, but it didn't reach her eyes. She turned away from him, walking slowly toward the massive windows that overlooked the sprawling city below. "Do you know why my mother has ordered this?" she asked, her back to him. John hesitated, unsure of how much he should reveal. I'm not entirely sure. Queen Ileana said something about protecting you, but I wasn't given many details." Araleth let out a soft sigh, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Of course, she didn't tell you everything," she murmured, almost to herself. She stood there in silence for a long moment, gazing out at the city below, lost in thought. John, unsure of what to do, remained quiet. He could feel the tension in the room, the weight of whatever unspoken truth lay between them. What was the real reason for this arrangement? What danger could possibly threaten the ZR princess that would require a human, of all beings, to protect her? Finally, Araleth turned back to face him, her eyes now tinged with a mix of sadness and determination. My mother is not wrong to be concerned for my safety, she said, her voice firmer now. There are factions within the Empire, those who believe that the monarchy should fall, that the ZR should embrace a new era of democracy or technocracy. My life has been threatened more times than I can count. John's brow furrowed. He had heard whispers of political unrest in the ZR Empire, but had never imagined it ran this deep. So, the threats are serious? He asked cautiously. Araleth nodded. Very. But it's not just political dissenters. There are forces outside the Empire as well, enemies who would like nothing more than to see the ZR royal bloodline wiped out. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. That's why my mother chose you. John blinked in confusion. Me? But I'm just a diplomat. I have no military training, no special skills. What makes me qualified to protect you? Araleth's gaze softened slightly, though there was still a sharp edge to her voice. You underestimate the importance of being human, John Carter. The ZR and many other species across the galaxy are aware of what makes humans unique. Your adaptability, your resilience, your unpredictability, it's these qualities that my mother believes will keep me safe. No one will expect a human to be my protector. John couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. I think they'd be right not to expect that. I'm not exactly a soldier. Araleth tilted her head, studying him for a moment before offering him a small, almost conspiratorial smile. Perhaps not in the traditional sense, but I suspect there's more to you than meets the eye. My mother is rarely wrong in her assessments. John wasn't so sure. He had spent most of his life as a quiet diplomat, negotiating trade deals and mediating minor disputes. There was nothing extraordinary about him, nothing that would make him stand out in the galaxy. But as he looked into Araleth's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than he was being told. Before he could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room, and the massive doors behind them slid open. A ZR attendant entered, bowing deeply before the princess. Your Highness, the evening meal is prepared, the attendant announced. Araleth nodded to the attendant before turning back to John. It seems we are expected for dinner, she said, her tone light but tinged with the ever-present tension of their situation. Shall we? John nodded, feeling a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. As they made their way toward the dining hall, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something far more dangerous than mere political intrigue. There was a deeper layer to all of this, a hidden threat that lurked just beneath the surface. As they sat down at the long, ornate table, John noticed that the meal was a feast of colors and textures he had never seen before. The ZR were known for their elaborate cuisine, and the dishes set before them were no exception. But despite the spread, Araleth barely touched her food. She picked at the plate in front of her, her mind clearly elsewhere. John tried to break the silence. Do you often dine alone? He asked awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Araleth looked up, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. You're not alone now, are you? She said, her voice carrying a hint of dry humor. John couldn't help but smile back. No, I suppose I'm not. The rest of the meal passed in relative silence, the unspoken tension between them hanging heavy in the air. As they finished, Araleth stood and gestured for him to follow her once more. There is something I need to show you, she said, her tone suddenly serious again. John followed her through a series of winding corridors, each one more elaborately decorated than the last, until they reached a large, imposing door. Araleth placed her hand on a scanner next to the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a small chamber, dark and cold, illuminated only by the faint glow of a holographic display in the center of the room. Araleth stepped forward, her expression unreadable as she activated the display. The hologram flickered to life, revealing a series of images, maps, star charts, and what appeared to be detailed schematics of various structures. John's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. This is a war room, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Araleth nodded, her violet eyes glinting in the dim light. There are forces in play, John Carter. forces that seek to destroy not only the Ziarkora Empire, but the entire galaxy as we know it. My mother may have summoned you here to protect me, but there is much more at stake than just my life." John felt a chill run down his spine as the weight of her words settled in. Whatever this was, it was far bigger than anything he had imagined, and he was now a part of it. Chapter 3. The Hidden Threat. John's heart pounded as he stood before the holographic display. The realization of what he was truly facing began to sink in. This was not just about political factions within the Ziarkora Empire, or even an assassination plot against Princess Aeroleth. This was something far more insidious and galaxy-wide. He could sense the gravity of it all, the layers of secrecy and danger entwined in the flickering images before him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Aeroleth stood beside him, her gaze focused intently on the maps and schematics projected in the air. The holographic display shifted, showing various star systems, some with highlighted planets. John recognized a few. Their names had appeared in the diplomatic communiques he had reviewed in his time as a diplomat. They were key systems, hubs of trade and political influence in the galactic network. "These worlds," Aeroleth said, her voice barely above a whisper, "have been under surveillance by forces unknown to most in the galaxy. What my mother fears, and what I now share with you, is that there is an external force, one far more dangerous than any internal rebellion." John's eyes narrowed as he studied the maps. "External force? You mean something outside the Ziarkora Empire?" Aeroleth nodded slowly. "Much further. We believe this threat comes from beyond the known galaxy. An ancient race, or perhaps a coalition of races that we know almost nothing about. They've remained in the shadows for millennia, but now they are moving." John stared at the holographic projection, trying to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. "But why would they be targeting the Ziarkora? Or you, specifically?" Aeroleth turned to face him, her violet eyes shimmering in the dim light. "Because we are one of the few empires in this galaxy with the resources and technology to potentially resist them. If they eliminate the royal line, the Ziarkora Empire will collapse into chaos, and with it, the rest of the galaxy will soon follow." John felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. The Ziarkora Empire was one of the galaxy's most powerful entities, holding sway over vast territories, entire sectors of space. If what Aeroleth was saying was true, the collapse of their empire could send shockwaves through the galaxy's fragile balance of power. It would be catastrophic. "And you're certain about this?" John asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This external threat, this ancient race? Are they really coming?" Aeroleth hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "We've intercepted transmissions, fragmentary at best, but they point to an organized force moving toward the galactic core. My mother has been trying to contain this information for years, but the signs are becoming harder to ignore. The political unrest within the Empire, the assassination attempts, these are not merely coincidences. Someone, or something, is stirring up these conflicts to weaken us from within." John took a step back, trying to process everything. It felt like the floor had fallen out from beneath him. When he had arrived on Ziarkora Prime, he had thought he was here to help with a political problem, perhaps to serve as a diplomatic shield for the princess. But now he was learning that the fate of entire star systems, possibly the entire galaxy, could be at risk. "And your mother sent me here to protect you from this?" John asked, still struggling to understand why a human diplomat would be chosen for such a critical task. Aeroleth turned away, her expression thoughtful. "Not just that. My mother believes that the Ziarkora are too predictable. Our enemies know how we think, how we fight, how we govern. But humans are different. Your species has only recently joined the galactic stage, and yet you've already made a name for yourselves. You're adaptable, unpredictable, and in many ways, still a mystery to the galaxy at large." She glanced at John, her expression softening. "That's why my mother chose you. She believes that a human could think in ways that the Ziarkora cannot. You might see threats where we would not. You might be able to protect me in ways our own warriors could never imagine." John shook his head, incredulous. "But I'm just a diplomat. I've never fought in any battles, never dealt with anything like this." Aeroleth smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "Perhaps that's precisely why you're perfect for this. You see the world differently. And right now, we need someone who can see what we cannot." John ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. He was in way over his head. And yet, As he looked into Araleth's eyes, he realized there was no turning back. He had been chosen for this task, whether he liked it or not. Before he could respond, the holographic display shifted again, this time showing a series of images of a desolate planet on the fringes of the galaxy. The surface was scarred with craters and canyons, and massive, ancient ruins dotted the landscape. This, Araleth said, her voice low, is the planet Kairos. It is one of the few places we believe may hold answers to the threat we face. There are ruins here, ancient beyond measure, that suggest contact with this external force long ago. But the planet is under heavy surveillance by hostile factions. My mother has forbidden any official missions to Kairos, fearing it would draw unwanted attention. John stared at the images, his mind racing. You think there's something on this planet that can help you stop them? Araleth nodded. I believe there are clues in those ruins, clues that could tell us more about our enemies. But we cannot send an army or a fleet, it would be too obvious. That's why we must go in secret. John's eyes widened in surprise. We? Araleth smiled faintly. Yes, we. You didn't think I would send you into danger alone, did you? Besides, I am the one they are targeting. If we are to find the answers we need, I must be there. John felt a surge of anxiety at the thought of venturing to such a dangerous place with the Zircor princess in tow. But as he looked at her determined expression, he realized that she had already made up her mind. And how exactly are we supposed to get to this planet without attracting attention? John asked, knowing that any unauthorized mission could spell disaster. Araleth stepped forward and pressed a series of buttons on the holographic display. The image shifted again, revealing a sleek, stealth ship hidden away in one of the royal docks. It was small, almost unassuming compared to the massive Zircor fleet vessels, but it was outfitted with advanced cloaking technology and weaponry that could evade most detection systems. This ship, Araleth said, her voice quiet but firm, will take us to Kairos. It's one of my personal vessels, equipped with the latest stealth technology. We'll leave under the cover of darkness, and no one will know where we've gone. John stared at the ship, his heart racing. This was happening. They were really going to do this. He had come to Zircor Prime expecting a diplomatic mission, and now he was about to embark on a secret journey to an ancient, hostile planet with the crown princess of the Zircor Empire. It sounded like something out of a far-fetched adventure tale, and yet here he was, standing on the edge of the unknown. Araleth turned to him, her violet eyes glowing softly in the dim light. You're not obligated to come with me, John. If you wish to stay here and continue your diplomatic duties, I will understand. But if you choose to help me, you will be risking your life. John swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision before him. He had spent his life avoiding conflict, choosing diplomacy over danger. But now, as he stood before Princess Araleth and the enormity of the threat they faced, he knew there was only one choice. I'll go, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. I'll help you. Araleth smiled, a genuine smile this time, and for a moment, the tension between them lifted. Thank you, John Carter. We leave at midnight. As John watched the holographic display flicker off and the room plunge into darkness once more, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn from which there would be no return. Chapter 4. The Descent into Kairos. The hours leading up to their departure passed in a blur. John spent most of the time alone in his assigned quarters, trying to come to terms with the enormity of what was about to happen. His mind raced with the potential dangers awaiting them on Kairos, an ancient, hostile planet shrouded in mystery. Every instinct told him that this was far beyond his capabilities, but there was something about Araleth's determination that stirred something in him. For the first time in his life, John felt the pull of something greater than himself, an adventure. Yes, but also a mission that could save not just a single life, but perhaps an entire galaxy. Still, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his inexperience. He was a diplomat, not an adventurer or a soldier. What good would he be in a situation like this? At the stroke of midnight, he made his way to the royal docks where the stealth ship awaited. The ship gleamed under the soft glow of the dock's ambient lighting, its sleek, obsidian black surface reflecting the light like a mirror. It was small and nimble-looking, with a design that screamed both speed and secrecy. Araleth was already there, dressed in a fitted suit of Zircora armor that shimmered with the same iridescent hue as her exoskeleton. The armor, though light and elegant, was designed for maximum protection, and John could see that she was fully prepared for whatever awaited them on Kairos. Beside her stood a Ziarkora attendant, assisting her with the final adjustments to her gear. John couldn't help but feel underdressed. He wore a simple reinforced flight suit that the palace staff had provided him functional, but nowhere near as impressive as Aeroleth's attire. He had no weapon, no armor, no training for combat. Yet here he was, about to descend into an ancient ruin with one of the galaxy's most important figures. As he approached, Aeroleth turned to him, her eyes scanning him up and down. There was a hint of amusement in her gaze, but it quickly shifted to something more serious. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her tone gentle but firm. John nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure if he was telling the truth. "As ready as I'll ever be." Aeroleth smiled faintly, then gestured toward the ship. "Let's not waste any more time. The longer we linger, the greater the risk of being discovered." They boarded the stealth ship in silence, the weight of their mission pressing down on both of them. The interior of the vessel was as sleek and minimalist as the exterior. Only the most essential controls and screens lined the cockpit. As they settled into their seats, Aeroleth took the pilot's chair with practiced ease, and the ship's engines hummed to life with a soft, almost inaudible thrum. "We'll be entering stealth mode as soon as we leave the atmosphere," Aeroleth explained as she keyed in the coordinates for Kairos. "This ship is equipped with advanced cloaking technology, so we should be able to avoid detection. But once we reach Kairos, we'll be on our own." John nodded, his nerves on edge as the ship began to rise from the dock. He watched the cityscape of Ziarkora Prime shrink below them as they ascended into the dark void of space. It was a breathtaking sight, but John found it hard to appreciate the beauty in the moment, his mind too preoccupied with the mission ahead. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere and into the vast expanse of space, Aeroleth activated the ship's cloaking systems. The ship shimmered for a moment, then seemed to vanish from sight, completely invisible to any prying eyes or sensors. The journey to Kairos was relatively short, but the silence between them felt heavy. Aeroleth remained focused on the controls, her eyes scanning the readouts as they hurtled through space at faster-than-light speeds. John, for his part, couldn't help but feel the growing tension in the air. They were heading into the unknown, and the thought of what might be waiting for them on Kairos sent a chill down his spine. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship slowed as they approached the outer rim of the Kairos system. The view outside the cockpit shifted from the glittering expanse of stars to the dark, desolate planet below. Kairos was a barren, rocky world, its surface scarred by millennia of tectonic upheaval and ancient conflicts. Massive craters pocked the landscape, and towering mountains jutted out like jagged teeth. "We're approaching the landing site," Aeroleth said, her voice calm but laced with tension. "I've chosen a location near the largest ruin complex. It's far enough from the surveillance perimeter that we should be able to enter undetected, but we'll need to move quickly once we're on the ground." John nodded, feeling his pulse quicken. This was it. They were about to land on Kairos, a planet steeped in danger and mystery. As the ship descended through the thin atmosphere, the rocky terrain of Kairos came into sharper focus. The surface was a mix of jagged cliffs, deep canyons, and massive stone structures that loomed ominously in the distance. The ancient ruins were unmistakable massive stone pillars and buildings that had clearly been constructed by a civilization long since vanished. The ship landed with a soft thud on a flat plateau, its engines powering down to an almost inaudible hum. Aeroleth quickly unbuckled her harness and stood, her expression tense but determined. "We need to move quickly," she said, her voice all business now. "The ruins are about 2 kilometers from here. We should be able to reach them before dawn." John followed her lead, stepping out of the ship and onto the cold, hard surface of Kairos. The air was thin, and the gravity slightly heavier than what he was used to, but it was manageable. As they set off toward the ruins, the eerie silence of the planet pressed in around them. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on the rocky ground. The ruins loomed larger as they approached, their immense scale becoming more apparent with each step. The stone structures were covered in strange markings, ancient symbols, and carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly energy. John couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as they neared the entrance to the largest building. Its massive doors partially collapsed but still imposing. "This is it," Aeroleth said quietly as they reached the entrance. She knelt down, examining the symbols etched into the stone. "These markings, they're older than anything I've ever seen. This place, it predates even the Ziarkora Empire." John peered at the markings, but they were incomprehensible to him. What do they mean? Aeroleth shook her head. I'm not sure, but there's something about them, something familiar. She reached out and pressed her hand against one of the symbols. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep rumble, the massive stone doors began to shift. Slowly, they slid open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. John felt a surge of apprehension as he stared into the darkness beyond. Are we really going in there? Aeroleth gave him a steady look. We have no choice. Whatever we're looking for, it's inside. With a deep breath, John nodded and followed her into the darkness. The interior of the ruin was vast, the ceilings towering above them, lost in shadow. The air was cold and still, and the walls were lined with more of the strange symbols and carvings. Faint glimmers of light pulsed along the walls, casting an eerie glow over the chamber. As they ventured deeper into the ruin, the sense of foreboding grew. John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though by what, he couldn't say. The oppressive silence of the place pressed down on him, making each step feel heavier than the last. Suddenly, Aeroleth stopped, her eyes narrowing as she studied a section of the wall. There's something here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached out and pressed her hand against one of the symbols, and the wall shifted, revealing a hidden passageway. John's heart raced as they stepped into the narrow corridor. The walls here were different, smoother, almost polished, and the air felt even colder. As they continued down the passage, a low, mechanical hum began to fill the air, a sound that grew louder with each step. What is that? John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Aeroleth didn't answer, her focus entirely on the path ahead. The passageway eventually opened into a large, circular chamber, and in the center of the room was a massive structure, an ancient machine. Its surface covered in the same strange symbols they had seen throughout the ruin. The machine pulsed with a faint, otherworldly energy, and the hum grew louder as they approached. This is it, Aeroleth said, her voice filled with awe. This machine, it's the key. John stared at the ancient device, his mind racing. The key to what? Aeroleth turned to him, her eyes gleaming with determination. The key to stopping the external threat. This machine was built by the same race that's coming for us. If we can unlock its secrets, we might stand a chance. Before John could respond, a loud clang echoed through the chamber, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. Aeroleth's eyes widened in alarm. We've been detected. We need to move now. The walls of the chamber began to shift, and John could hear the distant sound of footsteps, heavy, mechanical footsteps approaching fast. Whatever was coming for them, it wasn't friendly. Run, Aeroleth shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the exit. As they sprinted through the passageway, the sound of the approaching enemy grew louder, closer. John's heart pounded in his chest as they raced through the dark corridors, the ruins shaking around them. They burst out of the ruin and into the open air just as the sun began to rise over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of crimson and gold, but there was no time to admire the beauty of the scene. Behind them, the ruin began to collapse, and the mechanical footsteps were right on their heels. John and Aeroleth sprinted toward the ship, their lungs burning with exertion. They reached the stealth ship just as a massive, hulking figure emerged from the ruins, an ancient war machine, its metallic body gleaming in the morning light. Get in, Aeroleth shouted, leaping into the pilot's seat and powering up the ship. John barely made it inside before the ship lifted off, the war machine closing in on them with terrifying speed. Aeroleth activated the ship's weapons, and a volley of laser fire erupted from the ship's cannons, striking the war machine and sending it stumbling backward. With a roar of the engines, the ship shot into the sky, leaving the war machine behind. As they ascended into space, John collapsed into his seat, his heart still racing. That was too close, he muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. Aeroleth glanced at him, her expression a mix of relief and determination. But we made it. And now, we have the key. John nodded, still trying to catch his breath. They had survived, but the real battle was only just beginning. As the stealth ship slipped into the safety of hyperspace, John couldn't help but wonder what they had just unleashed. The ancient machine on Karos held the answers they sought, but it also held dangers beyond their comprehension. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. Their mission had only just begun. Epilogue: The Rising Storm. As the stealth ship disappeared into hyperspace, The ruins of Kairos fell silent once more. But deep within the collapsed chambers, something stirred, something ancient and powerful. Its time long overdue. Far across the galaxy, hidden in the darkness between stars, a fleet began to move. Their time had come. The storm was rising, and the galaxy would never be the same again.